I'm Elisa Brown, and let me tell you a story. My story. It begins with a phone call that shattered everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and home. I was standing in a glass elevator, 30 floors above downtown Chicago, when my phone rang. I expected the usual, "How's your trip?" or "When are you coming home?" Instead, I heard his voice. Cold, clipped, and almost triumphant. "I'm divorcing you," he said. "Also, I've sold the apartment. You'll need to figure out where you're going to live." That was the moment my world tilted. Not because he was leaving, God knows we've been drifting for years, but because of the sheer arrogance. The calm assumption that he could dismantle our life, cash out our memories, and walk away without consequence. Like I was just a footnote in his next chapter. But here's what Douglas didn't know. He just started a war because the apartment he thought he sold, it was never his to begin with, and the woman he thought he could crush so easily, she wasn't who she used to be. This is a story about betrayal. But more than that, it's a story about reclaiming power, about turning heartbreak into clarity, and watching a man who thought he had all the cards realize, too late, that he never understood the game. So, if you're ready, I'll take you back to where it all began, because I didn't just survive. I won. I'm divorcing you. Also, I sold the apartment. You'll need to figure out where to go. Those were his exact words, delivered like a business memo. Cold, efficient, void of emotion. I stood frozen in the hallway outside a conference room on the 32nd floor of the Brown and Moss building in Chicago, the blue glow of my phone screen still lighting up his name. Douglas. For a second, I genuinely thought it was some kind of sick prank. I even waited for the punchline. But it never came. The silence that followed his announcement was deafening. All I could hear was the quiet hum of the HVAC and the distant murmur of my colleagues behind the glass walls. My hand gripped the phone tighter as if I could crush his voice, crush him just by holding on. "You sold the apartment?" I asked slowly, my voice surprisingly calm despite the storm that had just cracked open in my chest. "Yeah," he replied, and I could hear the smirk in his voice. "Nicole and I need the funds to get started. She deserves more than that cramped place anyway." "Nicole!" He said her name like it was nothing, just another fact in his new life spreadsheet. Not a betrayal, not a bomb, just casual. As if I was the one who'd wandered into their love story uninvited. I wanted to scream, to laugh, to shatter my phone against the marble tile floor of that hallway. But I didn't. Instead, I simply said, "Sounds good," and hung up. I'm not sure how I walked back into that meeting. I don't remember a single slide or voice or question that followed. I nodded in the right places. I held my pen. I even smiled once or twice, I think. But inside, something was breaking loose. Something ancient and sharp, like ice cracking under pressure. Douglas had made a mistake, a fatal one. Not just in choosing to betray me, but in underestimating me. You see, months earlier, when we refinanced the apartment, Douglas had been so eager to lower our interest rate that he hadn't bothered reading the paperwork. He signed where I told him to. He trusted that I was just doing what I always did, handling the boring stuff. What he didn't know, what he never even thought to ask, was that I'd had the deed transferred into my name only. And that changed everything. That night, back in my hotel room, I didn't cry. I didn't scream into a pillow or drown myself in wine or replay our wedding video like a tragic cliché. I opened my laptop and forwarded the deed documents to Chloe. Chloe Ramirez had been my closest friend since college. One of those sharp, no bullshit women who never blinked in front of power and always knew where to stick the knife when someone needed taking down. She was also a brilliant lawyer, which made her the perfect person to call. "He said what?" she asked after I recounted the phone call. I repeated it, every word, even the smug tone. There was a long pause and then a low, amused whistle. "This idiot has no idea what he's done," she said. "He just tried to sell property he doesn't legally own. If he's already taken money, that's fraud. The word landed like a blade sinking into soft wood. Fraud. I felt a strange satisfaction rise in my chest, not joy, not revenge, just power. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the one being controlled. "What do we do next?" I asked. "First," she said, "we contact the buyer and let them know the sale is invalid. Then we send Douglas a formal letter outlining the legal consequences. If he so much as breathes in your direction the wrong way after that, we file suit." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Do it," I said. Then I closed my laptop and stared out the window at the lights of downtown Chicago, twinkling like a million truths waiting to be exposed. He thought he'd won, that I would crumble, that I'd slink away and leave the ruins for him and his Barbie. But I wasn't the one who'd be packing boxes. I was going to war, and this time had the paperwork to prove it. The next morning I woke up to an inbox full of chaos. Chloe had wasted no time. Her email subject line read, "Legal response sent, awaiting retaliation." Attached were PDF copies of the notice we'd sent to the buyer and a formal letter addressed to Douglas. The language was brutal, in the best way. Terms like invalid transaction, fraudulent misrepresentation, and pending legal action jumped off the page like a legal dagger straight to his gut. I imagined Douglas reading that letter with his smug little smile fading, his mind scrambling to piece together how his grand plan had unraveled overnight. He would have realized in that moment that this wasn't just a mistake, it was a legal disaster. That thought brought me a strange, serene kind of calm. I sipped my hotel coffee, bitter and burnt, and allowed myself a rare smile. Not out of vengeance, though I'd be lying if I said it wasn't satisfying, but out of relief. For the first time in so long, I wasn't reacting, I was controlling. By noon, Chloe had already received a phone call from the buyer's attorney. They were furious, and rightly so. Apparently, Douglas had promised them a quick close and even taken a partial deposit to secure the unit. The moment they heard the sale was invalid, they demanded an immediate refund and threatened legal action if their funds weren't returned, which meant Douglas was now cornered. He couldn't deliver the property, he couldn't return the money, and the only thing waiting for him on the other end was either a lawsuit or my mercy, and I had very little of that left. Later that evening, I returned to our apartment, my apartment. It felt different. Not haunted exactly, but paused, like it had been holding its breath, waiting for someone to claim it. His shoes were still by the door, his jacket still hung over the back of the chair, but it all looked misplaced, like stage props in the wrong play. I didn't touch anything. Not yet. There was something poetic about letting it sit as is, for now, a reminder of what he assumed he still owned. A setup for the confrontation I knew was coming, and it came faster than expected. Around 8:15 p.m., the front door burst open like a bad drama scene, and in walked Douglas, his face flushed with rage and his phone clenched in his fist. "What the hell is this?" he barked, waving the letter from Chloe. "You can't do this, Melissa. That apartment is half mine." I didn't flinch. I crossed my arms and leaned against the kitchen island. "No, Douglas, it's not. The deed's been in my name for months. You signed the transfer papers yourself after we refinanced, remember?" He blinked, genuinely thrown. "What are you talking about?" I walked over to the cabinet, pulled out a slim folder, and opened it. Inside was a notarized copy of the deed with my name printed neatly across the top. Sole owner. I slid it across the counter toward him. "You signed this," I said calmly, "because you didn't bother reading it, like always?" He stared at the document, eyes scanning the page, and for a brief second I saw it. The flicker of panic behind the arrogance. The realization that everything he thought he controlled had slipped through his fingers. "You think you're so smart," he muttered, voice low and bitter. "This doesn't change anything. I already made a deal. You're gonna look like a fool when this blows up." "The only thing blowing up is your life," I said coolly. "The buyer knows the sale is void. They're threatening legal action, And if you've spent even 1 cent of that deposit— I haven't, he snapped. Then you've already committed fraud, I finished, ignoring him. He turned away, pacing. You're blowing this out of proportion. You can't just kick me out of here. Actually, I can, I said, taking a slow step toward him. But I won't. Yet. You can stay for a few more days, consider it courtesy. But I suggest you start figuring out where you're going to live. The room fell silent. He didn't speak. He didn't yell again. He just stared at me, like he was trying to understand who this version of Melissa was and how he'd missed her all this time. I didn't blink. Then he did something I didn't expect. He turned to leave. No more arguments, no more threats. He just opened the door and walked out. And yet, I knew it wasn't over. Because an hour later, just as I was brushing my teeth, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was a screenshot of a legal document, a will. The name on the top read, Eleanor Hughes' Last Testament, and below it a handwritten note. You think you know who you married. Look again, R. Douglas thought he was smart until the buyer's lawyer threatened to sue him. Turns out, selling what you don't own tends to unravel fast when actual adults are involved. I read the email 3 times, half in disbelief, half in quiet satisfaction. Chloe had forwarded it to me that morning with a simple note. Told you, he's screwed. The buyer, some middle-aged tech investor named Carl Henson, had discovered the truth within hours of receiving Chloe's letter. The tone of his response was less confused and more furious. Apparently Douglas hadn't just misled him, he had outright lied. Claimed sole ownership, promised a clean transfer, and even offered a family discount if the buyer wired the deposit directly to his personal account. Of course he did. Carl's lawyer, a woman named Denise Cho, had made it crystal clear if the deposit wasn't returned in full within 5 business days, they'd file a civil lawsuit and press criminal charges for misrepresentation and attempted real estate fraud. It was everything I could have hoped for, and yet, oddly, it didn't feel like victory. Not yet. Because I knew Douglas. He wasn't the type to fold. Not until he was forced to his knees. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed with the first of several desperate messages. Douglas, we need to talk. Please don't make this worse than it has to be. Douglas, I didn't know you changed the deed. That's not fair, Melissa. Douglas, Veronica's freaking out. I need time to fix this. Ah, there it was. Not concern for me, not regret, just panic over what Veronica thought. Typical. I didn't answer. I forwarded the messages to Chloe. She replied instantly, do not engage. He's fishing for leverage. By noon, I was back in Chloe's office, one of those sleek law firms in the West Loop, all glass walls and hushed power. She handed me a folder containing everything we'd need to move forward: proof of ownership, the invalidated sales agreement, and a draft of a formal complaint should Douglas refuse to return the deposit. He's in a corner, Chloe said as she leaned back in her chair. He can't undo what he did. Now he's got Veronica and an angry buyer breathing down his neck. He's never handled pressure well, I murmured, almost to myself. He performs confidence, but he cracks easily. Chloe smiled slightly. Good, let him crack. I didn't stay long. I didn't need to. Everything was in motion now, and I had no desire to waste time in rooms that smelled like litigation and espresso. Back at the apartment, I stood in the entryway for a full minute before stepping inside. It was quiet. Eerily so. Like the space itself was waiting, bracing. I moved through the living room, past the bar cart he never used, past the framed jerseys he insisted on hanging above the fireplace. I didn't touch anything. I just looked. It was strange, realizing how foreign your own home can feel once the person you built it with becomes your enemy. On the kitchen counter, I laid out the folder Chloe had given me. One by one, I reviewed every piece of paper. The deed with my name, the letter to the buyer, the copy of the offer to purchase that Douglas had drafted with a signature line he had no right to use. I took a deep breath. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about clarity and closure. I was halfway through organizing the papers when the door opened. Douglas stood there, shoulders stiff, face pale. He didn't speak for a long moment, just looked at me, then at the folder, then back at me. "You're really doing this," he said finally, voice low. I didn't rise to meet the drama. I simply said, "You did this, Douglas. I'm just following the legal path your actions created." He stepped inside, slowly. "We can work something out. I'll return the money, I'll apologize, whatever you want." I shook my head. "What I want is for you to leave this apartment before you cost yourself even more." His jaw tightened. "You're overreacting." "No," I said calmly. "I'm reclaiming what's mine." For a moment, we stood there in a strange silence. Two people who once shared a bed, a life, a future, now barely able to stand in the same room. Then, just as he was about to speak again, the door buzzer rang. I walked over and pressed the intercom. A woman's voice crackled through. "Delivery from Melissa Brown. Legal packet, signature required." Douglas froze. I turned back to him. "Looks like someone else has something to say to you, too." I signed for the envelope without saying a word. The courier looked nervous. He probably assumed he'd just stepped into a domestic disaster zone, and, to be fair, he wasn't wrong. Douglas stood to the side, arms crossed, jaw locked in that stubborn set I'd seen too many times before. His eyes darted between me and the thick envelope in my hand, and I could almost hear his internal wheels turning. How bad is it? Who sent it? Is it over already? It wasn't over. It was just beginning. I closed the door, peeled the seal, and pulled out a pristine legal packet. A bold header read, "Notice of intent to file suit, Henson v. Brown." Douglas stepped forward, trying to grab the papers, but I held up a hand like I was stopping a child from reaching into traffic. "You don't get to touch this," I said, steady as stone. He scoffed. "I have a right to know. You gave up your rights when you committed fraud." The word hung in the air like gunpowder, sharp, heavy, irrefutable. He flinched. Just a flicker, but I saw it, the shame, the recognition that this was no longer about us or our failing marriage or even the woman he thought would replace me. This was legal. This was real. He'd gone from husband to defendant in record time. He tried to recover. "This is all just scare tactics. I can return the money and this will go away." I folded the papers and slid them back into the envelope. "You'd better hope it does, because if Carl decides to take this to court, you'll be lucky to walk away with your name still intact." He slumped onto the edge of the couch. The same couch we'd picked out together 3 years ago at some overpriced showroom where he let me believe we were building a future. He stared at the floor, silent. For a second, I felt the ghost of something. Pity, maybe? Familiarity, but it passed. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were steady. My heart, surprisingly calm. I realized in that moment that whatever we'd had, whatever thread of attachment had once tied me to this man, it had snapped. Douglas Brown was now a stranger in my home. "Where's Veronica?" I asked, not because I cared, but because I wanted to hear the excuse. "She's upset," he muttered. "She thought—" He paused, then sighed. "She thought we'd be moved in by now." "Of course she did," I said. "You sold her a dream built on lies, just like you did with me." He looked up sharply. "That's not fair." "No, Douglas," I said. "What's not fair is you pretending to be the victim in a mess you created with your own 2 hands." We didn't speak for a while after that. The silence was no longer tense. It was final. Eventually, he stood, pulled out his phone, and started typing. "I'll fix this. I'll call Henson. I'll explain it was a misunderstanding." I nodded once, watching him go through the motions. "Do what you need to do. But don't mistake this for forgiveness. I'm not offering redemption, just a path to minimize the damage for your sake, not mine." He didn't reply. He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the knob, and turned to me. "Do you hate me?" I didn't answer right away. I wanted to choose my words carefully. Not for him, but for me. "No," I said finally. "I feel sorry for you. You could have had something real, but you traded it for control, and now you've lost both." Then I opened the envelope again and placed it in the drawer by the front door, right next to the divorce papers. He left without another word. That night I ordered takeout, curled up on the couch, and opened my laptop to review the rest of Chloe's notes. I was halfway through reading a clause about asset freezing when a new email pinged. Subject: you missed something. From unknown.sender9213@protonmail.com. Attached a scanned document. A birth certificate. I opened it slowly, unsure what I was about to see. And then I froze. The document wasn't for Douglas. It was for Veronica Hughes, born Veronica Hughes Brown, and under father's name, it listed Raymond Brown, Douglas's father. Veronica walked into my apartment like she owned it. And for a fleeting moment, I think she actually believed she did. It was just past 4 in the afternoon. I had been expecting her, not because she'd called, but because people like her never ask for permission. They show up. They assume. They plant their stilettos into hardwood floors that were never theirs and act like the world owes them a welcome mat. I heard her heels before I saw her. Sharp, deliberate clicks against tile. Then came the voice. Sweet, high, and utterly condescending. So, she said, stepping inside without knocking, this is where we'll be staying. We? Slowly I turned to face her. Veronica Hughes was every inch the image Douglas had traded me for, slim, glossy-haired, dressed in a blazer, far too expensive for someone without a known career. She carried herself like someone who'd never been told no. Arm looped through Douglas's, her smile was smug, her confidence borrowed. Douglas looked less triumphant. He avoided my eyes, jaw tight, his posture stiff like someone bracing for a car crash he couldn't stop. I didn't say anything at first. I wanted to see how far they'd go. Veronica's gaze swept the room, pausing on the framed art, the glass shelves, the carefully curated furniture. Things I had chosen, paid for, and lived with. She gave a nod of approval as if blessing it with her taste. You have good eye, she said, gesturing toward a gold-framed mirror. I'll probably keep this. The rest we can update. I took one breath, then another. No, I said simply. She blinked as if the word itself was a language she didn't speak. Excuse me? I took a step forward, slow and deliberate. This isn't our apartment, Veronica. This isn't your hotel. This is my home. And you won't be staying here. Douglas tensed beside her. Don't do this. But I wasn't looking at him. Veronica's smile wavered. Wait. Douglas said this place was already sold, that you were moving out. I turned my eyes to him. Did he now? Veronica turned, glaring at him. You said it was done, that you had the papers signed. Veronica, that you were just giving her some time to pack. Douglas tried to sell a home he doesn't own, I said, voice slicing clean through the room. The deed has been in my name for over 6 months. The sale was illegal. The buyer is suing. And unless you'd like to join the list of people he's lied to, I'd suggest you walk out that door before I ask security to remove you. The silence that followed was glorious. Veronica looked between us, horror crawling across her face. You're joking. I'm not. She stared at Douglas, fury blooming in her eyes. You lied to me. He tried to reach for her arm, but she yanked it away. I moved out of my apartment for this. You said we'd start over here. I didn't think... No, she snapped, her voice suddenly sharper than I'd ever heard it. You didn't think. You used me to stage your next life, and you couldn't even manage that without screwing it up. She turned back to me, almost as if expecting me to commiserate, as if we were suddenly on the same side. But we weren't. You knew he was married, I said flatly. You don't get to play the victim now. Veronica flinched, then straightened. Fine, I'm leaving, she grabbed her purse. Chanel, of course, and stormed toward the door. Douglas called after her, Veronica, wait! She didn't. She slammed the door behind her. And for the first time in what felt like years, the apartment was quiet again. Just me and the man who'd tried to ruin me. I told you this wasn't over, I said, crossing my arms. Douglas sat down slowly at the edge of the couch. His hands trembled slightly. "I made mistakes," he said. "But you're taking it too far. This isn't about revenge anymore." "You're right," I said. "It's about truth." And just as I turned away, my phone lit up on the table. One new message. Same encrypted sender. Subject. Her name was changed in 8-3. Before that, she was known as Veronica Brown. Attachment, a blurred photo, 2 children hand in hand. One of them, unmistakably Douglas. The other, a girl with eyes just like his. I stared at the photo, my fingers trembling just slightly as I zoomed in. 2 kids, a boy and a girl standing hand in hand in a faded backyard, their faces caught in a moment of innocent laughter. The boy was unmistakably Douglas, the same dark hair, the same sharp jawline, and the girl, she looked just like him, the same piercing blue eyes. But who was she? The message said she was once Veronica Brown, before 2003, before the name change. I swallowed hard, heart pounding. What had Douglas been hiding? Who was this girl in the picture? Why had her identity been erased? Questions that now pressed on me like a tidal wave. That evening, I sat alone in the dim light of the living room, the envelope Chloe had given me earlier now open on the coffee table. Alongside the papers lay a printed copy of the birth certificate attached to the email. Veronica Hughes wasn't just the woman Douglas was trying to start a new life with. She was his half-sister. Half-sister, a part of his past no one talked about, a secret carefully buried. And that meant the tangled web was deeper than I thought. The implications were staggering. If Veronica was Douglas's sister, then all the whispered conversations I'd overheard, the clipped mentions of Vermont in his childhood, the vague references to family drama, that they weren't just vague memories. They were pieces of a puzzle I was only now beginning to see. But why change her name? Why hide her? Determined to find answers, I reached out to Ethan Brown, Douglas's cousin, who had once confided in me his suspicions about the family. Our meeting was arranged at a quiet cafe in Lincoln Park. Ethan was, as I remembered, reserved but earnest, with a furrowed brow that betrayed years of unspoken truths. "Melissa," he said after we exchanged greetings, "there's more going on than you realize." He told me about Eleanor Hughes, Douglas's mother, who died under mysterious circumstances when Douglas was a child. The official story was a car accident, but Ethan hinted at something darker. A whispered scandal, a family feud, and a will that never surfaced publicly. And Veronica? She was hidden away, Ethan said quietly, given a new identity, raised away from the family. It was supposed to protect her, or maybe hide her. I left the cafe with a notebook full of half-truths and a resolve burning hotter than ever. Back home, I played the old voicemail Douglas had left me months ago, the one I'd saved on a whim. His voice was shaky, scared, far from the arrogant man I'd just confronted. "Melissa, you don't understand what I had to do. It wasn't just about us, about the apartment. It's about keeping secrets, keeping her safe." The voicemail ended abruptly. I leaned back, mind racing. The woman I'd just forced out of my home wasn't just a pawn in Douglas's life. She was family, a family fractured by secrets, lies, and long-buried pain. The question now was simple. How deep did the wounds go? And how much was I willing to uncover? Then, as if answering my unspoken question, my phone buzzed again. A new message. Same encrypted sender. Subject, meet me in Vermont. Message. Body, the truth isn't safe here. Come if you want to know who you're really dealing with. Douglas tried begging, then threatening, but nothing prepared him for the legal envelope that bore my name, and mine alone, on the apartment title. That envelope arrived like a verdict, silent, cold, impossible to ignore. It was delivered early one morning by a courier whose polite smile couldn't hide the awkwardness of handing over such a message. I signed for it with a calmness I didn't feel, carrying the weight of what it represented straight to the kitchen table. Inside was a certified copy of the deed, the sole ownership document bearing my name, Melissa Brown, in bold letters, No mention of Douglas anywhere. This wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a shield, a weapon, and proof that despite all his attempts to undermine me, I held the upper hand. When Douglas arrived that evening, flushed with anger and disbelief, I set the envelope in front of him like a judge dropping the gavel. "You think you can threaten me?" I asked quietly. "You've got nothing." His eyes narrowed. "That's not fair, Melissa." "Fair?" I echoed. "Did you think it was fair to try and sell my home behind my back, to drag my name through the mud while you built a new life with her?" He paced the small living room, running a hand through his hair. "You don't understand what's at stake. Veronica and we had plans." "Plans based on lies," I said. "You gambled with my life, my home, and your money, and you lost." He stopped and faced me squarely. "You're ruthless." I smiled, but it was bitter. "I'm smart, and I'm protected." Behind me, my phone buzzed with a new message. "Chloe's update. Buyer rescinded. They're furious but cooperative, preparing lawsuit papers." I didn't even need to read it to know Douglas's world was crumbling. The room felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. "Get out," I said. He didn't argue. Instead, he slumped onto the couch, the fight drained from him. "I never wanted it to end like this," he muttered. "Well, it's not over," I replied. "Not for you." Later that night, I sat alone. The apartment quiet except for the occasional creak of the old floorboards. I thought about how far I'd come. From the stunned woman in that hallway to the one who held the power now. But power had its price. As I opened the envelope again, a new text popped up on my phone from an unknown number. "You don't know the whole story. Ask him about Vermont." My pulse quickened. Vermont. That place had been a ghost in Douglas's past, never spoken of, avoided like a scar. I didn't know what I'd find there, but one thing was certain. The damage Douglas had done was deeper than I thought, and the fight was far from over. I barely slept that night. The message about Vermont haunted me like a shadow that wouldn't leave. Who was the sender? And what was so important about that cold, snowy state that Douglas always avoided mentioning? The next morning, Chloe called me early, her voice sharp and full of urgency. "Melissa, I've started digging into Vermont records. Something doesn't add up in Douglas's family history. I think you should consider going there face to face." I hesitated. Vermont was far from the life I'd built here in Chicago, far from the courtroom battles and city lights. But deep down, I knew Chloe was right. The roots of Douglas's lies were tangled in that place. And if I wanted to win, I had to confront them. That afternoon, I packed a small bag and booked the earliest flight to Burlington, Vermont. Landing in that quaint town felt like stepping into a different world. Snow blanketed the streets, and the air smelled of pine and something older, something secretive. I checked into a small inn on Church Street, its windows frosted and dim. After settling in, I made my way to the town's historical archives and courthouse. The clerk, a kindly woman named Jessica Mitchell, was skeptical at first when I asked about Douglas's family records. "Douglas who?" she said, peering over her glasses. "Douglas Brown," I replied, holding up a photo. "I'm looking into his family history." After a pause, Jessica nodded and led me to a dusty cabinet filled with old birth certificates, wills, and court documents. I sifted through pages, my heart racing as I uncovered inconsistencies. Names crossed out, documents amended, records sealed. One file caught my attention. A birth certificate for a Veronica Hughes. Changed legally to Veronica Brown in 2003. The dates matched the girl in the photo. I left the archives and headed to the town's cemetery, where I met Raymond, the groundskeeper. He was an elderly man with a quiet demeanor but sharp eyes. When I mentioned Douglas's mother, Eleanor Hughes, his face darkened. "She was a troubled woman," he said softly. "Died young in an accident no one talks about. Folks say the family wanted to keep it quiet." I pressed him gently for details, but Raymond only shook his head. Some truths are better left buried. That evening, I met Ethan Brown, Douglas's cousin, at a small cafe. He was wary but cooperative. I always thought Douglas had something to hide, Ethan admitted. That whole Vermont chapter, it's messy. He handed me a worn audio tape, an old recording from Eleanor's funeral. Listening to it chilled me. A woman's voice, weak but clear, warning someone to protect the children from a great betrayal. Back in my hotel room, the pieces began to fit together like a puzzle. Douglas's lies weren't just about an apartment or a new life. They were about identity, about a past rewritten and a family fractured. I realized then I wasn't just fighting for my home, I was fighting for the truth. As I prepared to leave Vermont, my phone buzzed with another message from the anonymous sender. If you want the full story, meet me tonight at the old chapel on Mill Street, alone. My heart raced. This was no longer a legal battle. It was a journey into the dark heart of a family secret. In the old chapel on Mill Street looked like a relic from another century. Cold stone walls, cracked stained glass, and the kind of silence that pressed down on you like a weight. I wasn't sure what I expected to find inside. Answers? Confrontation? Or maybe just another layer of shadows. But I knew one thing. I was ready to face whatever waited there. As I stepped through the heavy wooden door, the smell of damp wood and candle wax hit me. The room was dimly lit by a few flickering candles, casting long shadows that danced on the walls. At the far end, a figure sat alone on a worn pew. A woman wrapped in a thick coat, her face hidden beneath a hood. I approached cautiously. "You're Melissa," she said without looking up. Her voice was low but steady. "Yes," I replied. "Who are you?" She pulled back her hood, revealing sharp eyes that seemed to pierce through me. "I'm Jessica. I've been waiting for someone brave enough to come." We sat across from each other on the cold wooden bench, the air thick with unspoken secrets. Jessica told me things I wasn't prepared to hear. The truth behind Douglas's family, Eleanor Hughes's death, and the tangled web of lies that had been spun to cover it all up. Eleanor hadn't died in a simple accident. She'd been silenced. Her death was ruled accidental, but Jessica handed me a faded police report indicating signs of foul play. Bruises, broken bones, inconsistent with a crash. The family had covered it up. Douglas's father, Raymond Brown, had the influence to bury the truth. And Veronica? Jessica revealed Veronica was Eleanor's daughter, Douglas's half-sister, hidden away to protect her from the scandal and family wrath. "I know it's a lot," Jessica said, "but you have to understand, this family's legacy is built on deception." I felt the weight of it all settle on my shoulders. It wasn't just about reclaiming my apartment anymore, it was about justice. For Eleanor, for Veronica, for all of us trapped in this cycle. As I prepared to leave the chapel, Ethan met me outside, his expression grave. "There's one more thing," he said, "a verdict from years ago, sealed by the court but never made public." He handed me a thick envelope. Inside was a court decision nullifying a will, one that had granted Douglas rights he had no claim to. My heart pounded. This was the final piece. Douglas's claim was not just fraudulent, it was legally void. The storm I had feared was coming, but this time I was armed. The next step was clear: confront Douglas with the truth in a way that no lie or manipulation could undo. But as I looked up from the papers, my phone buzzed with a new message. "They're watching. Be careful. Trust no one." Dead. Mar. The truth was dangerous, and so was the fight ahead. The chill of the Vermont morning seeped through the thin walls of my small inn room, making me pull the blanket tighter around my shoulders. Despite the cold, my mind was burning with questions and half-formed answers. The warning from R echoed relentlessly in my thoughts. Someone was watching. Someone wanted to keep the past buried, and they were willing to do anything to stop me. Ethan had been right. The stakes were higher than I'd imagined. This wasn't just about property or inheritance anymore. It was about power and control, about secrets that had been kept for decades beneath a thin veneer of respectability. Later that day, I walked slowly down the narrow streets of Burlington, each breath visible in the crisp air. The town's quiet was deceptive. Beneath its postcard-perfect exterior lurked decades of whispered rumors and unspoken family drama. Back at the inn, I spread out the pile of documents Chloe had sent over. Court rulings, amended birth certificates, police reports, and the faded copy of Eleanor Hughes's will that had been legally nullified years ago. Each piece painted a picture more disturbing than the last. Douglas's entire claim to the Brown legacy was built on a foundation of lies and half-truths. The will had been tampered with, the birth certificates altered to erase Veronica's identity, the police report buried under layers of family influence. I realized that I was not simply unearthing a family secret, I was pulling on a thread that could unravel an entire dynasty. But with every discovery came the weight of danger. Someone didn't want me to dig too deep. That very night, as I sat reviewing the paperwork, a soft but deliberate knock echoed through my room. My heart jumped. No one was supposed to know I was here. I tiptoed to the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. Just as I was about to open the door, I noticed a small white envelope slipped beneath it. I picked it up with trembling hands. Inside was a single, weathered photograph. It showed Douglas, standing beside his father, Raymond Brown, in front of an imposing old mansion, the one I'd heard about in Ethan's stories. But what caught my eye was the blurred figure lurking behind them, a man I didn't recognize, watching silently, almost threatening. The back of the photo bore a chilling handwritten message. "It's never just about the money. It's about who holds the truth. Be careful." A cold shiver ran down my spine. I sat down, the photo heavy in my hands. The Brown family's web of deceit was deeper and darker than I'd imagined, and now I was tangled in it. The next morning, I called Chloe with urgency. "This is bigger than I thought," I said. "We're not just dealing with property disputes. We need protection, surveillance, security. I don't want to wake up to a smashed window or worse." She agreed immediately. "I'm arranging discreet support. You're not alone in this." With Chloe's backing, I felt a flicker of hope. Still, paranoia crept in. Every shadow in that quiet town felt like a watcher, every stranger's glance laden with suspicion. Returning to Chicago, the fight continued. One afternoon, an anonymous tip led Chloe and me to a hidden file in the county courthouse, a trove of financial records revealing Douglas's clandestine dealings. Hours of sifting through papers uncovered offshore accounts, unexplained transfers, and shell companies, all pointing to a man desperate to hide his true financial state. I sat at my kitchen table, under the soft glow of the city lights, the papers spread before me like a map of his deceit. Douglas had built a fortress of lies, and I was tearing it down, piece by piece. Yet, the deeper I dug, the clearer it became. This fight was no longer just about me. It was about exposing a legacy of betrayal. Just as I was about to close the last folder, my phone buzzed with a new message. "They're closer than you realize. Watch your back. Trust no one but yourself." My breath caught. The war had only just begun. Douglas stepped into my apartment for what I knew would be the last time, his face a mix of frustration, disbelief, and a desperate attempt at calm control. He walked in like he still owned the place, as if the years we shared, the lies he spun, the betrayals he committed, could all be wiped away with a few words. But I was ready. More than ready. On the sleek glass coffee table sat a small black USB drive, its plain surface stark against the polished wood. A white label bore a message in bold, handwritten letters. "You lied to everyone." His eyes locked onto it immediately. I saw the confident mask flicker, then crack, exposing a flicker of fear and uncertainty. He swallowed hard, the arrogance momentarily gone. "What is this?" he asked, voice strained, as he took hesitant steps closer. I said nothing. Instead, I moved across the room with quiet purpose, plugged the USBs into my laptop, and clicked play. The screen flickered to life, and the room filled with grainy, shaky footage. Douglas Brown, the man who had betrayed me, signing documents with tense, forced expressions. The camera captured pages of forged wills, falsified claims to family assets, and secret deals that betrayed every trust he once held. Behind the lens, Veronica's face flashed briefly, stunned, hurt, betrayed, her eyes reflecting the truth she had only just discovered. Douglas tried to speak, to interrupt, but I cut him off coldly. "You don't have the right to watch," I said firmly. "Listen closely." The footage shifted to a recorded phone call between Douglas and his father, Raymond Brown. Their voices were low and calculating, planning how to secure the family fortune at any cost, even if that meant crushing their own kin. His face paled, and he looked away, the weight of shame settling over him like a shroud. "You lied to me," I said softly but unwaveringly, stepping toward him. "You lied to Veronica. You lied to everyone who'd trusted you." Just then, Veronica entered the room quietly, her eyes fierce yet shimmering with hurt. "I thought I was starting over," she whispered. "But I was just another pawn in your game." Douglas's shoulders sagged, the facade crumbling. "I never wanted this to come out." "But it has," I said, holding his gaze. "And now you have to face it." I reached into a folder and laid the divorce papers Chloe had prepared on the table in front of him. "Sign here," I said firmly, "or I'll see you in court." His hands trembled slightly as he took the pen, eyes heavy with regret and resignation. When he finally stood to leave, I caught a flicker of something I hadn't seen before. Remorse? Relief? I wasn't sure. The door clicked softly behind him and the apartment sank into an oppressive silence. I walked to the window and looked out at the city skyline. The glittering lights a stark contrast to the darkness that had filled my life. The fight was over, but my story was far from finished. Suddenly my phone buzzed, pulling me from the silence. An email notification lit up the screen. The subject line was simple and chilling. "If you're ready, it's time to talk about your mother. Right." A new mystery beckoned, pulling me deeper into a web of secrets, lies, and truths, still waiting to be uncovered. The email from R had been sitting in my inbox all day, the subject line nagging at the back of my mind like an unanswered question. When night finally fell over Vermont, I couldn't resist any longer. I opened the message, "Meet me at the cemetery, midnight. Come alone. There are things you were never told, things that might change everything." The cemetery wasn't far from my inn, but the walk there in the dead of night felt like stepping into a different world. The cold bit at my skin despite the heavy coat I wore, and the moon cast long shadows across the frozen ground. Tombstones stood like silent witnesses to stories long buried. Much like my own family's secrets, I arrived early, nerves buzzing under my skin. The old oak tree near the center of the graveyard was where I was told to wait. Its gnarled branches reached out like twisted fingers, creaking softly in the wind. The figure appeared from the shadows just as the clock struck midnight. Jessica, the same woman from the chapel, the one who had first tipped me off about the darker side of the Brown family legacy. Her face was pale but resolute. She didn't waste words. Eleanor's death was no accident. It was murder. The weight of that statement knocked the breath from my lungs, but how? Why? Jessica looked around nervously before pulling a small, worn envelope from her coat pocket. Evidence the family paid to keep hidden. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside, faded letters from Eleanor spoke of fear and betrayal. Police reports detailed injuries inconsistent with a car crash. And the photograph. Eleanor standing next to a man I didn't recognize. Eyes wary, lips pressed tight. "She threatened to expose the truth," Jessica said. "About Raymond Brown's dealings, the way he controlled the family, the things he did to keep power." My mind reeled. Douglas's father. The man who seemed a pillar of the family. Could he have orchestrated this? Before I could respond, a sudden snap of a twig shattered the silence. Jessica's eyes snapped toward the dark tree line. "We're not alone. Heart hammering, I followed her swiftly through the labyrinth of gravestones, the shadows seeming to close in around us. We barely made it to the road before a car's headlights swept across the cemetery entrance. Back in my room, shaken but determined, I spread the documents across the desk. The letters, reports, and photos wove a dark tapestry of deceit and murder. I spent hours poring over every detail. The pieces began to fit. The fear Eleanor lived with, the family silencing her, Douglas's own silences. Just when exhaustion threatened to consume me, my phone buzzed again. Another message from R. You're closer than you think. But beware, some truths come at a cost. Trust no one. The warning sent a shiver down my spine. The deeper I delved, the more dangerous this became. I knew one thing with brutal clarity: this final drive for truth wouldn't be easy. It was a path shadowed by secrets, lies, and people willing to kill to protect them. And I was ready to face it all. Thanks so much for watching Family and Heart Stories. If this story touched you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more heartfelt dramas every week.